I had a conversation with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago. He is a venture capitalist in California. He ironically was talking about it. It's somewhat funny. He'll know I'm talking about him when I tell you the story. He was at a conference in Las Vegas with finance executives. And so I've got to go out there this weekend for a meeting. And when I go to Utah, when I go to Las Vegas, when I go to northern Arizona, the altitude is pretty high. You're talking 8,000 feet in some areas, 4,000 feet in others. The air is very dry, and I get nosebleeds. I typically now my ENT tells me to use saline nasal spray and humidify my nasal passageways before I go out there, because your sinuses get really dry in that air until you're higher elevation. It's dry, you get stuffy, you get nosebleeds. And he was like that, got a nosebleed, and he thought, my gosh, I'm at a conference of finance venture capitalists. They're going to think I'm on cocaine. And he was talking about that led to a conversation about how common it is in these high-tech, high-stress financial worlds. Cocaine has come back. I was talking to a radio executive a while back who said it's just a commonplace more and more for people on his staff. He's pretty convinced are using it. And there was a story in the Wall Street Journal about a month ago about 5 different people. 2 worked for hedge funds, another worked for an investment bank, 2 prominent law firms, young people. They all died in New York City, not from cocaine overdoses. They used cocaine, and it was laced with fentanyl. This friend of mine who was at this conference in Las Vegas said among those people who he hangs out with, he does not partake, and I believe him, but he said it's very common for them to carry test strips for fentanyl, that it's become commonplace, that you've got to make sure your drugs are not laced with fentanyl. What a weird life. Just as an aside, what a weird thing. I don't know people who do that. Maybe I do and just don't realize it, but this commonality of people in these industries who are just regular drug addicts and they don't think they have a problem and they're addicted and they don't realize it and how common it is. And they're using fentanyl test strips to test their cocaine to make sure. But the issue is fentanyl. And you can say, and this is something that comes up on the complete opposite side of that. You can say, screw them, one less drug addict. You can listen to this mother who lost 2 sons to fentanyl deaths and say, oh, she must have been a bad mother. Why would they do that? Don't judge. I know people who got addicted to opioids because their doctors prescribed them for major injuries. And I know people who occasionally smoked marijuana and got some that had fentanyl laced in it and they died. And I know parents who have struggled to get their kids free of addictions and couldn't, and they lost their kids. I know someone very well who lost his son to a drug overdose. Tried everything he could in and out of rehab. The drugs were so potent they got a hold of his kid and they wouldn't let him go. Not a happy topic to start the show with, but the point is this. We know for certain the drug cartels in Mexico have run across the border. They've set up shop in American cities. We know the drugs are coming in nonstop. Part of me wonders if our American politicians and policymakers have become so convinced the war on drugs was a failure, they don't want to fight another one. They would rather our kids, relatives, loved ones, friends, and neighbors die than fight a war that they've been convinced by the libertines they lost. I can tell you, when we were fighting a war on drugs, The car in front of me didn't smell like marijuana every time I'm on the interstate or the highway and have to turn my air on in my car to inside air because the people in front of me are smoking weed in their car. That wasn't happening when we were fighting a war on drugs. Our kids weren't dying of fentanyl when we were fighting a war on drugs. And if we're not going to fight a war on drugs, can we at least fight the drug cartels? They've set up gangs in American cities. They've crossed the border. They're bribing elected officials. They're working with the Chinese to flood Mexico with the creations of China and smuggle them across the American border. They're roping human trafficking victims into carrying it across the border. They're finding other ways to get it into the United States. An insatiable desire to kill Americans. This mother is right. We are in a war, whether we believe it or not. We are in a war that we did not choose to be in.
If we had Chinese troops lining up along our southern border with weapons aimed at our people, you damn well know you would do something about it. This is a war. Act like it. Do something.
Why isn't Congress and the president? And by the way, this is a bipartisan problem. Don't you dare blame Joe Biden for this. This is a bipartisan problem. This was happening under Donald Trump, too, and he wanted to build his wall, and he couldn't build his wall, and he didn't do a whole lot else. And we can't arm the Mexicans. That's one of the solutions that Republicans and Democrats alike have floated. Let's arm the Mexicans. You cannot arm a failed narco state because those arms will go to the drug cartels. Mexico is a failing state. Oh, but it's racism to say that. No, the hell it's not. It's the truth. Mexico is a failed narco state. There are parts of that country the Mexican government cannot send its army or they will be slaughtered. We have a problem. And you know, part of the issue here too is that you've got these branches of American tribalism now where, oh, why are you dealing with Mexico? You can't solve East Palestine. Why are you dealing with Ukraine? You can't solve East Palestine. Why are you dealing with this? Why not just build a wall? We got multifaceted problems, and we've got the two old dudes from the Muppets in the balcony yelling out their opinions on things, and they don't know jack about it. The fact of the matter is we have a multifaceted problem south of our border, and it's tied into the Chinese. And neither the Republicans nor the Democrats have seriously thought about this. They do not want to fight a war on drugs because they've decided that they can't win the war on drugs because they gave up fighting a war on drugs. And now we got drugs all over American society now. You drive down the road and you can smell the marijuana even in states where it's not legal. And nobody cares anymore. Nobody wants to enforce it anymore. No one thinks it's a problem. Society around us is collapsing. Kids are getting addicted to drugs and they're laced with fentanyl, and the next generation is dying. Rich kids, poor kids, white kids, black kids. Moms and dads are losing their kids. Moms and dads are then losing their lives. We're losing executives. We're losing school kids, all to this crisis that no one in Washington on the other side actually wants to do a damn thing about because they're convinced it's a war on drugs. And why are we fighting a war on drugs? We did that before. Well, then fight the freaking drug cartels. Go to war. Blow them up. Donald Trump wanted to and was restrained by the military. At this point, we may need to. Do we not have the resources to find the manufacturing facilities and send in the spies to blow them up? Do we not have the resources to send in the assassins to kill the drug cartels? We have them embedded within our American cities. They are killing our children. And no one in Washington wants to do anything? And yeah, actually, there is a partisan point here. This president could do something. And instead, you know, the thing that frustrates me the most about the Democrats in these situations is because they can't do a holistic, systemic approach to everything, they don't want to do anything. They don't want to build a wall because there are underlying root causes that must be addressed. No, if you build the wall, it begins to lessen the burden. Build the wall. And do the other things as well. This can't be an all or nothing approach. Mr. President, American kids are dying because of what the Chinese and the Mexican drug cartels are doing. What are you going to do? Don't give me the root causes BS. Don't give me the nonsense about we must address the underlying causes. Why not build a wall? That will at least curtail. I mean, this is common sense. You build a giant wall across the southern American border to keep people from coming in. It reduces the patrol burden. And by the way, you've taken away the surveillance hot air balloons down there because you seem to not claim to have funding. You're making the problem worse. You need to make the problem better. And to you Republicans who just scream about the border wall, it's not just the border wall. There are other things you can do as well. And we should be beefing up police training. We should be expanding the number of police officers. We should do a wholesale crackdown on corruption. Inside this country, the drug cartels are bribing officials and setting up shop around the country. This must become a multifaceted approach, but we should not believe that because we can't take on all areas at one time, we can do nothing. Take on an area we can take on. We can sure as hell build a wall. And we can sure as hell lob missiles at the production facilities in Mexico. And we can dare the Mexicans to challenge us on this. They are a failed narco state, and their failures is making it easier to kill American kids. And we should not rely on the diplomatic niceties of our southern border when they're allowing this horde of drugs and human trafficking victims to come across our border and pollute our kids and kill them. Addiction is a terrible, awful thing. There are a lot of people in this country who struggle with it. But there are also a lot of people who would not be dead but for the drugs being laced with fentanyl. And we should be able to stop that. And we should be able to stop it by any means necessary because that mother is right. We're at war. Whether we choose to fight it or not, they're killing us.